My dad works in B2B marketing, but I never really knew what that meant. Then one day my dad came by my school for career day and told everyone in my class he was a big ROAS man. Then he just kept saying things like, the bigger the ROAS, the better, over and over. My friends still laugh at me to this day. I think it means calculating a return on ad spend. One thing's for sure, I'll be known as the ROAS man's kid for the rest of my days. Why couldn't you just be a fireman or a lawyer? Why? You ruined my life, Dad.
Not everyone gets B2B, but LinkedIn has the people who do. And with ads on LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people based on job title, industry, likelihood to buy, and more. Start converting your B2B audience into high-quality leads today. We'll even give you a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/MPN to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/MPN. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be.
You may know you're listening to this show along the Marketing Podcast Network, but did you know there are other great shows on MPN to help your business? Jonathan Gaby hosts a great podcast called Marketing Distilled. He's the master distiller. Jonathan, tell us what these fine folks are going to get out of listening.
On Marketing Distilled, you'll hear from industry experts and me to learn about more marketing things and taking those complex things and distill them down into actionable strategies or tactics.
Amazing. Where can people subscribe?
You can find the show at marketingpodcast.net or search for Marketing Distilled wherever you get your podcasts.
You heard him. Go subscribe.
Welcome to Storylines Live, the only podcast that explores the meaning and the power of the most important story in business, the one that answers why someone should buy from you, work for you, invest in you, or partner with you. This is the story that defines the very character and nature of an organization. At WordWrite, we call this your capital S story. In each episode of Storylines Live, we feature guests who have great insights on business storytelling, who can share their experiences and key learnings to help you and your business do a better job of sharing your capital S story to deliver remarkable results. Today, we're honored to have Adam Murphy, who is the founder and CEO of Sourceree, a very cool technology company that we have the opportunity to work with here at WordWrite. And he's got an amazing story. I'm just going to share a little bit of Adam's background here. The company was formed in 2010 and really grew out a lot of experience that Adam had, and we're going to talk about that. It's a technology company that started doing work for the federal government in some very interesting areas, and has since branched out to do a lot of work for the private sector as well. Really, I think a theme of the episode today is going to be how that experience that many companies in this country earn from doing very sophisticated government work can lead to very interesting innovations and benefits in the private sector as well. Adam's been doing technology pretty much his entire life. And while he wasn't a Navy SEAL before he became a technologist, he might know something about the Navy. Adam, welcome to Storylines Live.
Thanks, Paul. I'm honored to be here and happy to share my story. And talk about the organization and what we've built. And I believe as a learner in the way that I am, listening to podcasts and people's stories is how we build our organizations better, get fresh ideas, and really leap them forward to the next level. So I'm honored to be here and happy to share what I've learned and hoping some people can use that for the good of their organization.
So true, Adam. You know, and I always say when people say, why do you do a podcast? I say, because it's one of those things that's safe to do while driving, mowing the lawn, or any kind of multitasking. You know, you don't want to be watching cat videos while you're doing any of those things I just mentioned. And it's a great way to be learning for darn sure. Adam, before we move on, is there anything that I missed in your background that you think it would be important for our audience to know about you?
No, I think you've teed it up pretty well.
Great.
And I can roll that into just really trying to dive into the background and saying that I grew up here in central Pennsylvania in Evansburg. I live in Johnstown now, which is where our company is kind of based out of. And prior to starting the organization, Sourceree, I worked at a large defense contractor in the region for 10 years. And I was fortunate to get experience supporting organizations all around the Beltway, inside and outside. And I was young and willing to travel, so I was the first person they'd put on the road to partake in any contract that was awarded. And we benefited greatly from having Jack Murtha as our congressman at the time. He worked on a lot of earmarks and brought a lot of things to the region that grew its defense contracting base and has allowed us to prosper as an area for the past near 40 years almost. So having that experience prior to starting Sourceree really allowed me to understand the industry and where it came from. And to build that experience up came from a lot of hard work and blue collar jobs and laborious jobs, if you will, growing up as a teenager. But I did stay local. I went to UPJ,
Yes.
the local branch campus of Pittsburgh, to focus on computer science. And later got an executive MBA up at MIT that really allowed me to help understand the inner workings of how lean operations work and continues to allow us to build the culture and client base that we do here at Sourceree.
Wow, that's great. So from Johnstown to MIT, huh?
Yeah, it was a great road, and I took the shortened version up there, and I'll tell you why.
Yeah.
Is because I learned that way. I couldn't sit through classes very well. That long learning structure, long semester didn't work well for me. And I learned that kind of early on, that it was more of an experienced, hands-on, try it, fail, start over again, figure it out. And we continue to kind of take that mantra and leverage it in all the other aspects of life, from learning other skills like woodworking to being a mechanic and doing all the different pieces of and parts of engineering and building to provide that experience to help round out my knowledge and understanding.
Wow, that is really cool. And we're going to definitely dig into a lot of that in this episode for sure, Adam. Given the nature of the work that you did before you started Sorcery and that you folks do today, what's the furthest you've traveled from Johnstown for work? I'll bet you've been some interesting places.
Some I have, but not as far as others. The furthest I've gone is in Rotterdam in the Netherlands.
Okay.
A lot of times, the large defense contractor that I worked for, we were directed to use or provided technologies from other companies that we would bring into contract to try them out and see where they were. And oftentimes they were abroad or from different regions or areas. And I'm fortunate enough to work with a company that was over there, and I'm still friends with those guys today, and we do a lot of work together, actually. But I've been to London every year, so we maintain a client base over in Europe because of those relationships that we built, and it allows us to expand upon our technology stack and our capabilities of what we do further there.
That's really great, Adam. And relationships are so key to developing a business. And as the founder and the first CEO of Sourcery, I'm sure a lot of times your story is intertwined closely with the story of the company. On Storylines Live, we have a concept of how we talk about storytelling, the capital S story, which I defined at the open for the audience. I'm always curious to ask the guests we have on the podcast, what's their definition of storytelling? And you have such a great story. I'm very curious to know, how would you define storytelling for the success you've had personally and with the company?
So that's a good question for me, because it's not something I fully embraced until meeting you and understanding how you leverage that in marketing. But I recognized in looking back that the stories are how I learn. So listening to the different podcasts that relate to leaders' stories or founders' stories and how they did things is how I take bits and parts of what I've learned from those and apply them in my own life. Because the manuals and books, the hundreds and hundreds of books that are written on here's how you run a business and here's what you do, don't work exactly the way they're supposed to for everyone. So you've got to take the bits and pieces that you learn from those and your experiences and tie them together. And that's the way that I view a story, is that I use them to launch myself forward and to help the organization grow and change and adapt to the future.
Related to all that, because you are the founding CEO of the company, I'm curious, how have you used your own personal story, some of which you shared with our audience a few minutes ago, in building the company? When you meet somebody for the first time, let's say, what is it that they learn about the Adam Murphy story that helps them better understand sorcery?
It stems from what you mentioned originally, and what I kind of touched on and said we get back to is hard work.
Hmm.
Is growing up, having numerous jobs across many different industries that were labor based,
Yes.
heavy labor, and
Mhm.
being able to understand what it means to not only earn your way but have an effective change in your environment or where you're at. So being able to take the story that I have and seeing what working in the intelligence community in the Defense Department, what small little teams within the government that we can't speak about, right? How they affect change. And one of the lines from Adam Grant's latest novel, his latest book,
Yes.
is about how the world is only, it's hard to fathom that small teams can change the world, but that's all that ever has.
Yeah.
And to take that and know that that's what we're trying to do at Sorcery is take a small team and make a large impact on the world. And we see that through this. I see that through the stories that I've experienced in working in different facets of the government. And I've been lucky and very fortunate to be on high profile teams at the right place at the right time, multiple times in a row, to be able to see how that can work. And I've also been in teams that haven't worked too. And when you're in that situation, just like understanding a leader, is you may not realize that you're working for a good leader until you work for one that's not a good leader.
So true.
Um,
So
and you
true.
look back in hindsight and you're like, wow, that worked well, but I didn't realize it. And you have to study it. You got to study their movements to understand what did and what didn't and try to remember that.
To put this in a story vernacular, Adam, I often think that our story is really the sum total of every chapter we've been in before, right? The way you survive and thrive in business is you learn which landmines not to step on in order to continue to grow, right? But you have to step on a few in the beginning. And sometimes you look back and you say, "Oh, I missed that landmine. I didn't even know it was there." And that's kind of what you're sharing right there. I think it's very interesting. Um, I think too, for a lot of our audience who may not be familiar with Pennsylvania, you mentioned you're in central Pennsylvania. Johnstown is the headquarters city for the company. For our audience that's not familiar with Pennsylvania, I'm in Pittsburgh, so obviously people think of Pittsburgh, they think of steel. And I think, Adam, it's fair to say that Johnstown's character, while it's a little bit of smaller city, it's the same sort of a thing. When steel and heavy manufacturing went away, there was kind of a question about what would be next, right?
They're always, yes. And that's one of the things that I love about the community we live in. I'm a very big proponent of trying to help the community get back on its feet,
Hmm.
is that it's a resilient society, is what I find. And I say that because everyone's familiar with the Johnstown flood that happened
Yes.
over,
100 some years ago, right? Yeah.
yeah, a long time ago. And since then, it's had to redefine itself multiple times through the steel industry collapsing. With the passing of Congressman Murtha, a lot of defense work has moved out and has come back and forth, but there's a history of that here. So it's a society that continually gets knocked down and is able to stand itself back up. And that's really, I think, the key to our community here is resiliency, because we
Mhm.
can take what you throw at it and we'll figure it out.
Yeah, I think too, Adam, one of the interesting things about what you and Sorcery have done, and we're going to get into this in a few minutes here. If you would think about where companies that have cut their teeth on sophisticated defense work might be located, you mentioned the Beltway. Earlier in my career, I worked in DC. We used to call them Beltway bandits, right? And all the big defense contractors have a presence in Washington, DC. You threw a dart at a map, you probably wouldn't strike Johnstown. But literally, as you mentioned, the late Congressman Murtha, one of his things was really, and there have been a few national politicians. I think about Senator Robert Byrd from West Virginia as another example, representing states where there are communities that had some economic hardship, and they really made it a point to try and help those communities come back by seeding, if you will, other industries. And I think that's kind of what happened with Johnstown, and now today part of the story of sorcery, right?
It is, and it's a actually larger problem than that itself. Is the DoD, Defense Department, has recently stood up an organization that provides grants and funding to regions where there was the head of a Defense Appropriations Committee on Congress. When they move out, they realize that the revenues and the money flows with that and goes away. So in some areas like West Virginia, like Johnstown, there's grant money available to help the communities try to stand themselves back up and find a secondary industry from defense contracting, if you will.
Right.
And it's such a lucrative position for someone in Congress, and such a powerful position, because it's nearly 75% of the country's budget, that they have so much power as leading the appropriations for the Defense Department. So it does, and it provides a great skill set, a great experience, and great paying jobs for communities that are part of that district.
Right. And that's what I want to get into next. Folks, we're going to take a quick break here. And when we come back, we're going to talk about how everything that Adam just mentioned helped him build a company that's focused on technology, and technology that has the power to change people's lives. Don't go away. We'll be right back.
You may know you're listening to this show along the Marketing Podcast Network, but did you know there are other great shows on MPN to help your business? Jonathan Gaby hosts a great podcast called Marketing Distilled. He's the master distiller. Jonathan, tell us what these fine folks are going to get out of listening.
On Marketing Distilled, you'll hear from industry experts and me to learn about more marketing things and taking those complex things and distill them down into actionable strategies or tactics.
Amazing. Where can people subscribe?
You can find the show at marketingpodcast.net or search for Marketing Distilled wherever you get your podcasts.
You heard him. Go subscribe.
Folks, we're back on this episode of Storylines Live, talking with the founder and CEO of Sourceree, Adam Murphy, about technology and how he is building a technology powerhouse in the community of Johnstown, Pennsylvania, and around the world, thanks to his own personal story, working for the federal government in some very interesting areas. Adam, how about starting us off here by giving us a sense of how do you help your clients? What is it that you feel as the CEO is the greatest benefit that your clients get from working with Sourceree?
Sure. So in general, our philosophy is that we help people succeed, specifically through software development and performing analysis. Mm-hmm. And what does that mean? Like, we're categorized as a technology company, but what does it really mean is that we're really good at building software, and we're also really good at looking at data and performing analysis, whether that be financial analysis to help the Defense Department build and execute their budgets, or to perform intel analysis work for the agencies that are looking to understand the world and the trends that are happening and protect us against threats.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And position us to be a better organization or a country going forward. So how can we better help the world in what we're doing? So in general, that's what, and what I get out of business really relates to that, as why it's part of my personal story, is the best part of what I see in the organization and enjoy is helping people succeed. And seeing that, getting them through their career, having them capitalize, have things that they're proud of, as well as seeing customers and clients feel the same and get something out of it. Know that we helped provide that impact.
That's great, Adam. Folks, and being in the business that our company is, we pay close attention to some things maybe that other leaders in business would gloss over. And one of the things I was struck by, Adam, it's very prominent on your website, are the values of the company. And you were just kind of talking about that. Embrace innovation and challenge the status quo. Deliver quality work throughout constant communication. Create a culture where people enjoy coming to work and what they do. A lot of times, being in the business we're in, we'll see company values or mission statements on websites that either sound too highfalutin or are it's hard to understand what they're really saying they do. And I have no problems whatsoever understanding your clear and strong commitment to the values you've articulated for the company. Could you give our audience a little bit of a sense of what led you to start Sourceree? Why was it? What happened in your life, or what was going on in the industry that you said to yourself, you know what, I have to start my own company?
Certainly. And I had worked, as I mentioned, since 1999 in a large defense at a
Mhm.
large defense contractor and spent about 10 years there. And I had also worked with a friend to start an IT support company and consulting firm, and we were supporting local businesses. But I loved working on the big defense projects, building large software, having global impact, if you will. And I
Mhm.
wanted to combine those two together. At the time, I was looking for a mentor and someone to help me grow within the bigger company, and I wasn't provided that, or I didn't feel like I had that. So
Mhm.
I took a risk and stepped out and had the opportunity to go support BP in the oil spill cleanup, and we were
Wow.
working for the fund to provide the reparations for the small businesses that were affected by the spill. And it gave me a few months away that I could separate from that industry and come back without conflict, if you will, and try to
Mhm.
set up the organization. And it was just myself consulting for the first 4 years of our existence, learning the ropes, understanding how payments work, the contract structures, getting all that in place, and then um, since then, we grew significantly. We made an acquisition at one point that didn't work out so well. The cultures didn't mesh.
Yep.
The contracts were different. We learned our lesson. Um, we've grown, we've shrunk, we've had employee struggles, we've had client issues. Every time you experience issues and problems and failures, you learn and step forward.
Yep.
And now we're kind of in a spot where we're building some products to supplement labor, if you will,
Mhm.
and we're learning those lessons and moving forward.
Yeah.
Um, and really, to push a little bit further into what makes us different as an
Yes,
organization
please.
from the
Yes,
next,
please. Mhm.
is that we've been in the industry, defense industry, if you will, for 14 years providing contracts and
Mhm.
providing contract support. And really, it's nothing more than trading time for payment, right? And at that point, you're putting a value on someone's life. And I have a very hard time kind of doing that personally as a
Mhm.
philosophy. So, as I mentioned, we're trying to build up products that supplement revenue, that we can provide support and not base people's pay off of what the government determines is a good
Yes.
hourly rate. So we've been constantly evolving as an organization. So what made us different yesterday isn't what makes us different today. And
Mhm.
what we're seeing as an industry trend is that the larger defense integrators, like the Lockheed Martins, the Boeings, the Northrop Grummans, they're sort of in a race to the bottom on rates where
Yeah.
we're providing staff and support within the industry. They're driving those rates down so they can get cash flow to make their payments and provide their debt service while they're waiting for the milestone payments on their big contracts like ships, airplanes, and satellites. And
Yep.
what we're seeing is that the small businesses are being pushed away because they're coming in to make unprofitable rates on that. So what we're in the process of seeing is that small businesses are now entering that defense market through innovative products. So it's back to that small team of individuals at companies like Anduril that are started out making little drones that had these massive impacts that someone like Lockheed Martin couldn't compete with or couldn't build fast enough, or a SpaceX that is putting rockets with people up to the moon, where Boeing, who's been doing it forever, can't seem to get their quality in line to get things there because
Oh,
they're driving towards that cheaper price.
exactly.
So we're leaning towards that market of being able to provide products that our
Mhm.
folks will support inside the department. And we're trying a bunch of different products. We're trying to see what works. And we're also balancing those products commercially and in the government so we can provide a stable revenue stream. If one goes down, the other goes up, and balance it out depending on the nature of the situation, because government contracts are typically good for a long time if you
Yes.
perform, if you keep the work up. So it's a good, stable revenue source where commercially you could be here today, gone tomorrow, but there's lots of profits. So we're working to balance that out and change not only the model of what we are for the industry, but also have a bigger impact on how that industry changes the department and pushes it forward.
I love that, Adam. It's the concept really of kind of sustainability, right? In the world of agriculture, there's a lot of discussion these days about monoculture, which is to say, I'm only a corn farmer, and then my farm, I exhaust the capabilities of the soil to grow corn, and then that's it. And in a business sense, technology sense, what you're saying is, you don't want to just be farming one crop. You want to make sure that you're not only serving your historical strong customers who come out of the government, but also private industry. Could you give our audience a sense of some of the exciting and fun things you're working on that you were describing a couple minutes ago, the products?
I will, but I'll go back to your farmer comment and also
Okay.
say that you could argue that a farmer these days is a technologist because have you sat in one of those tractors and seen everything that's
Oh
inside
yeah.
them?
Yeah.
I
You
mean,
mean because they have Sirius XM, Adam? No, I'm just kidding.
they have more buttons than I would know what to do with sitting in front of a
Right.
computer. So it's
You're right.
very impressive what they can do,
Oh yeah.
and how they're moving their businesses forward.
True.
But along those lines, those are the types of pieces of technology and innovation that we like to get involved with. So um, one of the facets in which you say your capital S story is knowing which answer of are
Right.
we marketing as an organization? Are we marketing to people that buy from us, that we want to work, that we want to work for us, that we want
Right.
to invest in us and be our partners? And I'm going to say that we balance all four of those things as called business development and handle them all the same way because they all feed off each other. And that's how we grow as an organization. And along those same lines, what we're doing is listening to customers. And when they come to us and say, we have this problem, we'd like you to solve it and we want this, we look back and say, no, we think you might actually need this. And we're going to invest in that product with you and build it together and go forward and see if it works. So we're doing that in three drastically different areas at the moment.
Yeah.
One
Give
is
us, give us a sense of what those are.
Absolutely. One is a ticketing software for our local Mill Rats baseball team. That's a
Oh,
prospect. It's in the prospect league for college students. We're trying to build a piece of software that we can take to high schools and little leagues that allows you to order concessions online, buy your tickets, and for the team to reach the fan and marketing at a very low cost without those Ticketmaster fees type on top, if you will, and combined all that capability to not only grow their revenue, but give us a source of revenue too, so we can partner with them.
nice.
Another side is we've recently been working with the VA, the Veterans Affairs Office, to participate in a challenge where we're building an AI tool for mental health, where practitioners and patients can record their conversation and it produces a medical record. It provides all the notes, provides everything to them without the hours that physicians have to spend taking notes and putting things in the system, as well as define the billing codes there so it's not screwed up, as we all have gotten hospital bills we've had to call about
Oh,
and complain and argue and figure out what we actually need to pay. We've been working on that and to show that capability. And then lastly, a tool we've been working on for a really long time is a supply chain visibility piece of software to help organizations understand where the goods and materials in their supply chain come from, as well as the ultimate beneficial owners of the companies that they're working with.
wow.
It's no secret that we analyze foreign investment and we work for organizations that are trying to find things that are infiltrating our supply lines and foreign adversaries that are trying to inject themselves into the supplies of the United States. And we've built some tools to help analyze and be able to show buyers where their tools are coming from so they can comply with regulations, as well as just make sure that they have the materials and the goods flowing.
That's very, very interesting. And just for our audience, I mean, uh, that's a perfect example to me, Adam, of something that was purpose built for, let's just say, national security purposes. We don't have to get into details, but people will understand that there are agencies in the federal government who need to know, as you put it, whether foreign adversaries are infiltrating the supply chain and where things are going. What you're doing now is you're developing a commercial version of that that's going to help solve what's been one of the biggest problems since COVID, the pandemic, which is where's my stuff, right?
It
And where
is.
did it come from, right?
That's exactly it. Yeah. Do you want to buy it in conflict zones, or do you want the Chinese in your supply chain? If you're
Exactly.
following the Buy American Act and providing goods to the United States, you as an organization are responsible for knowing where the materials you purchased came from. And
Right.
this helps those organizations comply with that.
And in a way, it's you would say it's a paperwork problem. It's not paperwork though, really, because there's not really as much paper these days, but you need to know that, let's call it the chain of custody, right? You need to know that when, for those of you who aren't watching this on YouTube, I'm holding my pen, all the different component parts of my pen, where did they come from, right? And if pens are something that's covered by Buy America programs, how can I prove that everything in the pen has come from where it's supposed to come from, right? That's
Yep.
basically what you're talking about.
Yeah, and making sure that you're following the sanctions put out by the State Department.
Right.
For example, BlackRock, we found it in the financial industry. BlackRock isn't investing in ETFs that they have. They're investing in Chinese military organizations, and they didn't know it because they didn't have the tools and the capability to understand where their investments were coming from 2 or 3 layers below. So
Wow.
it's solving problems across the board from physical supply chains to the financial supply chains.
Wow, that is such fascinating stuff, Adam. I think we're going to have you back on later to talk about some things. Hey, if you can solve the ticketing thing, Taylor Swift and a few other people not quite as famous might be happy with you, right?
Well, we're maybe not, we might not get to that level, but when you're sitting at a little league game and you want your cheeseburger without missing an innings of your son pitching, that's the problem that
All
we're
right, that's
solve.
very relatable. See, and that's just a little story you told right there. I like the way you did that. Um, Adam, what gives you the most satisfaction in your work?
I push it back to seeing other people succeed.
Hmm.
That's the big piece is helping helping people put a smile on their own face, whether it's within their own career, achieving something they couldn't do, or helping service members that are out in a war zone that need to come back home. We want to come back home.
Wow, that's profound. It really, really is. I appreciate that. Now, a lot of times I'll meet people in business, leaders, and have them on the podcast. And I'm not saying this is true of you, but a lot of times people will say, I don't know, I'm not that creative. I don't know that much about stories. And one of the things that I noticed right away about Sourceree, the company has a very cool name. It sounds like what what happened in a Walt Disney movie, Sorcery, but it's spelled differently. Could you just explain to our audience why you named the company what you did?
I'd like to say I named it, but I kind of stole it.
Yeah.
And I stole it from those individuals I was talking about in Europe that I was really close with.
Oh,
That was the name of their organization they had. And they had it had closed up in a few years back, and I asked them if I could use that, if I could take the name and use it in the organization, because I wasn't very creative, and it was the Murphy Technology Group before that. So we changed it because it fits very well with what we do, and they're still a part of our organization as consultants and friends of Sourcery, if you will. And what it really means is, if you take it in two parts, source and and it's reusing source code was the original definition of really why it exists, and it plays nicely in marketing. It looks well, and we love it.
I think that's great. And listen, you're in fantastic company. One of the other things we see a lot with the business leaders is that when they smartly borrow, there's no need to feel like that was a good decision. Let's just remember that in order to get the name Tesla, Elon Musk paid somebody to sit in front of the guy's house who owned it for like 2 weeks until he finally broke down and sold it to Elon Musk for 50 grand. Now, your story is, I think, a little more, let's call it pleasant. I'm sure that poor fellow who sold the Tesla name for 50,000 wishes he probably asked for something with a few more zeros in it. But I just
Yeah.
love the name, and I think it's just a great description.
Well,
Adam,
maybe he got some stock options too back in the day.
he probably did, right? Adam, is there anything we didn't talk about in today's episode that you'd like to share with the audience?
No, I think we covered everything. We kind of talked about planned, and you got a good background of where we come from, and we'll see where we go here over the next few years.
It's been awesome to have you on today, Adam. Where can our audience find you online?
So, on the typical sources of LinkedIn and any social media platform that's out there, or through email at adam@sourcery.com.
And would you mind spelling sorcery for the audience in case they're driving and listening?
Or it is Sourceree.
So
Sorcery.
sorcery.com. Great.
Yes.
Thank you again, Adam. It's been a great pleasure to have you on, and I'm sure we'll be chatting more in the future as you and your team develop and commercialize some of the really cool technology solutions we talked about in this episode. And folks, I want to say thank you for being here with us on this episode. We'll see you on the next episode of Storylines Live, the only podcast that explores the power and the meaning of the most important story in business, the one that answers why someone would buy from you, work for you, invest in you, and partner with you. Until then, see you next time.
You may know you're listening to this show along the Marketing Podcast Network, but did you know there are other great shows on MPN to help your business? Jonathan Gaby hosts a great podcast called Marketing Distilled. He's the master distiller. Jonathan, tell us what these fine folks are going to get out of listening.
On Marketing Distilled, you'll hear from industry experts and me to learn about more marketing things and taking those complex things and distill them down into actionable strategies or tactics.
Amazing. Where can people subscribe?
You can find the show at marketingpodcast.net or search for Marketing Distilled wherever you get your podcast.
You heard him. Go subscribe. This podcast is heard along the Marketing Podcast Network. For more great marketing podcasts, visit marketingpodcasts.net.